She painted silence into beauty. A woman of few words, Maria Bennett let her art speak volumes. Sometimes a grief, sometimes a wonder, often things no one dared say aloud. Her canvases were whispered poetry, her color choices like distant echoes from memories no one had ever shared, yet everyone somehow recognized. She wasn't just an artist. She was a mystery. In her lifetime, Maria refused the celebrity that hunted her. She avoided cameras, ignored interviews, and turned down every museum that begged for a retrospective. She rarely left her home in New Orleans. In fact, in her final years, she was hardly seen at all. When news broke that Maria Bennett had passed away at 67, the world mourned quietly. Artists cried in their studios. Collectors held their breath. And for a moment, it felt like modern art itself had lost its ghost. But what no one knew, what not even her closest friends could have guessed, was that Maria had left something behind. Not a final painting, not a letter, a vault. Welcome to Family Crime Chronicles, your ultimate destination for chilling true crime stories. We uncover the darkest corners of real-life mysteries, twisted affairs. Please subscribe now, like and comment where you're watching from, for a new episode of True Crime Stories. A sealed windowless, industrial warehouse in the shadowed edge of the French Quarter, padlocked for decades, unmarked, unlisted. Only one person had the key, a niece Maria hadn't spoken to in nearly 20 years. And what that niece found inside, it wasn't just art. It was a revelation. It was a confession. It was something that would change everything the world thought it knew about Maria Bennett. Maria Bennett was always different. She burst into the art world in the early 1980s with a single painting, Stillness Number 1. A white square on raw linen, with a thin red thread stitched through its center. Critics were baffled. Collectors were divided. But within a year, it sold for $1.2 million. And Maria vanished. She would reappear from time to time. A sudden gallery show in Berlin. A midnight installation in an abandoned church in Prague. But she refused to be filmed. She spoke in riddles. She never stayed long. Her reputation became legend. A fandom artist whose work could make grown men weep and hardened critics fall silent. By the 2000s, she had become a myth. Rumors swirled that she had gone blind. Others claimed she had burned every piece she ever made. Some said she died years earlier. The truth was stranger still. Maria had withdrawn from public life, but she hadn't stopped creating. Behind a cold steel door in New Orleans, she had been quietly building something. Something massive, something hidden, something no one was ever supposed to find until she was gone. And that's exactly what happened. To the outside world, Maria Bennett was an enigma wrapped in elegance. She appeared briefly at gallery openings, draped in flowing black garments, her face partially obscured by wide-brimmed hats or veils. She didn't speak much, if at all. She'd sign a canvas with a tiny silver ink pen and then disappear. Photographers learned not to bother. Collectors never got handshakes, let alone conversations. She was an idea more than a person, a rumor given shape. Her art? Minimalist, sparse, yet impossibly emotional. A single black line cutting across a white canvas could fetch $3 million. A sculpture made from melted mirrors once caused a minor stampede in a Paris exhibition, but no one could explain how she did it, how her work made people feel seen. Broken open, healed somehow. Maria's studio, if you could call it that, was legend. People imagined a pristine loft, maybe overlooking the Mississippi, filled with diffused light and silence. But that wasn't the truth. Behind the myth of Maria Bennett the minimalist, behind the million-dollar canvases and whispered exhibitions, lived someone very different. In private, Maria was not a minimalist at all. She was a collector, a hoarder of lost beauty. Her hidden warehouse, later dubbed a vault, was no polished artist haven. It was more like an archaeological site of forgotten art. Piles of canvases, unfinished and dusty. Sculptures that looked alive in the dark. Hand-bound journals stacked 6 feet high, each page coded, unreadable, unless you knew her symbols. Old record players spinning warped classical vinyl. Broken easels. Bronze figures with limbs removed. A single red ballet slipper nailed to a wall. And among it all, paintings. Not hers. At least, not the ones anyone had ever seen. These weren't minimalist. These weren't for sale. They were chaotic, explosive, loud in a way that screamed of things long buried. Portraits with eyes scratched out, landscapes of cities burning. A child's face, painted a dozen times, each time more distorted than the last. No one knew she had done these. No one knew she could do these. Some were signed. Others weren't. Some appeared to be from other artists entirely, unknown and signed untraceable. Had she made them? Had she saved them? No one knew, and Maria wasn't around to explain. But the deeper her niece Lillian and the art experts dug into the vault, the more questions they found. There were boxes labeled in French, Russian, Japanese, languages Maria wasn't known to speak. Inside, photographs, charred documents, and sculptures that resembled things from religious rituals or ancient pagan myths. Some paintings were dated as far back as the 1930s. Others were unfinished. A few had been partially burned, then repaired with gold thread, like they'd been rescued from a fire and turned into relics. This wasn't just an archive. It was a shrine, a collection built by someone obsessed, not with fame or wealth, but with truth, with memory, with voices that had been erased. She had been building this for decades, quietly, secretly, and not a soul had known. It made people wonder, had Maria Bennett ever really revealed herself to the world at all? Had the minimalist icon, the darling of the avant-garde scene, been just a mask? Or was this dark, hidden archive the real Maria? And if it was, why had she kept it all hidden? Why had she never shared it? Why had she waited until she was gone to let anyone see it? Maybe she was afraid. Or maybe it was always meant to be this way. A final reveal, a posthumous unveiling, not a gallery, but of a soul. The key was cold in Lillian's hand. She hadn't seen her aunt in nearly 2 decades. Their last interaction was a tense Christmas dinner where Maria had said almost nothing, just observed quietly, like she was already slipping away from a world. Now, as executor of her estate, Lillian stood in front of an aging steel door, rust streaking down the hinges, the scent of old paint and metal hanging in the humid New Orleans air. It was an anonymous warehouse on the edge of the French Quarter. From the outside, it looked abandoned, no windows, no signage, just a keypad lock and a single camera, long since broken. Lillian hesitated, then inserted the key. The vault opened with a groan, and time stood still. Inside, the light was dim. A single skylight leaked sun from above, casting long shadows across the room. It was massive, far larger than anyone expected. Not just a studio, not just a storage space. It was another world. The walls were lined with towering wooden shelves, packed edge to edge with rolled canvases, labeled boxes, odd-shaped containers. Sculptures, dozens, stood on cracked pedestals. Some were covered in cloth. Others were so lifelike they startled her. At the center of the room, a table strewn with journals, loose sketches, and antique objects that seemed more suited to a museum than a warehouse. But what caught Lillian's eye first were the paintings. Over 80 of them, each more haunting than the last. Not the sleek minimalism Maria was known for. These were raw, unfiltered, some terrifying, others breathtaking, some unfinished, with brushstrokes frozen mid-thought. One featured a woman in profile, her face turned away, with dozens of mouths painted along her spine. Another was nothing but layered reds and blacks. When experts later X-rayed it, they found 3 previous paintings beneath it. One was a portrait of a crying man. The second, a burning house. The third, a field of white lilies with tiny skulls hidden beneath the petals. Maria had painted over her own truths again and again, but here they had survived. And then there were the journals. At first glance, they seemed chaotic. Pages filled with strange symbols, lines of poetry, maps, newspaper clippings from around the world. Lillian recognized some cities: Warsaw, Beirut, Caracas. Others were less familiar. There were notes about auctions that had never been publicized, mentions of anonymous buyers, donations made in cash to obscure institutions. A recurring phrase kept appearing: truth must be buried to survive. But once I'm gone, let them see it. One journal contained sketches of gallery layout, each room titled after a word: wound, silence, witness, return. Notes detail what piece would go where. But the gallery had never been built. No one had ever seen this blueprint before. Maria had been planning something. A final exhibition? A confession? A warning? Then came the controversial discoveries. In the back corner of the vault, Lillian found a series of crates, sealed, nailed shut. It took hours to pry them open. Inside, sculptures unlike anything in Maria's known collection. One was made entirely of bone, human and animal, interwoven with silk. Another was a sphere of melted glass, embedded with teeth. There were rumors later, whispers that some of the pieces resembled band works from Eastern Europe, art long thought destroyed during political purges. A few even matched stolen art databases, though no official connection was ever proven. And then there were the coded letters, pages referencing anonymous donations to museums in Rome, Morocco, and Kyoto, encrypted emails printed and folded inside sketchbooks. One cryptic phrase appeared repeatedly in French. Ce que est cache nous definite. What is hidden defines us. Experts began arriving within days. Restoration teams, legal consultants, curators from the world's biggest museums. The vault had become a phenomenon, quietly, discreetly, so as not to spark media frenzy. Each day brought new discoveries. A fragment of a sculpture wrapped in a love letter, a painting hidden inside the wall itself, a canvas nailed shut inside an old shipping crate with no return address. Every item seemed placed with care, not as storage, but as messages. Like Maria had created an elaborate puzzle, designed to be solved only after her death. No press releases, no exhibitions, just truth. To Lillian, it no longer felt like she was managing an estate. She was entering her aunt's mind, walking through memories Maria never shared, fears she never spoke, beauty she never sold. The vault wasn't just a workspace. It was a living monument, not to Maria Bennett the artist, but to Maria Bennett the woman, private, complex, hidden, and finally revealed. As the days unfolded inside the vault, a strange rhythm took over. Each canvas, each note, each sculpture pulled the observers deeper into Maria's hidden narrative. It wasn't just about art anymore. It was about intent. Maria Bennett hadn't simply created in secret. She had curated something deliberately elusive. Every object seemed to speak in fragments. The truth wasn't told. It was scattered, whispered through layers of texture and color, through symbols tucked into corners, through burned edges and blank spaces. One of the most unsettling discoveries came from a crate mislabeled as Archive 17B. Inside was a sculpture that sent chills through the team. It was human-sized, constructed of wire, cloth, resin, and something else. Something that looked like bone. The figure had no face. Instead, a mirror was positioned where the features should have been. Viewers saw only themselves reflected, twisted, distorted by the curvature of the glass. At the base, etched into a metal plate, were the words, "This is what we bury." Some said it was beautiful. Others said it was horrifying. Everyone agreed. It demanded to be seen. But not everything inside the vault was physical. Scattered among Maria's journals were dozens of notes, scribbled thoughts, half-formed questions, and messages that seemed more like riddles and reflections. One recurring entry stood out. Final gallery, not to be opened in my lifetime. Let them see what silence held. And then this line, "The truth isn't what they think I painted. It's what I never let them see." Among the most controversial pieces were those Maria never wanted displayed, at least not during her life. One painting, now simply known as a black table, depicted a dinner scene of 9 figures, all faceless, all seated, staring at empty plates. The colors were chaotic, blood reds, sickly yellows, veins of black branching like cracks in the canvas. Some experts claimed it referenced political violence. Others thought it was about family. One thing was clear, it was personal. In the margin of the canvas, nearly invisible, Maria had etched a single phrase, "They will know who they are." But who and why? The deeper the team dug, the more they realized Maria had operated a shadow network of sorts. Notes revealed she'd purchased forgotten works under pseudonyms, donated anonymously to museums, and funded restoration efforts for sensitive artists in repressive regimes. She'd hidden her support under layers of silence and secrecy. A map found folded into one journal had red pins across continents: Warsaw, Cape Town, Seoul, Havana, Beirut. Next to the pins were strange numbers, auction references, perhaps, or something else. There were whispers of an untraceable fund Maria had maintained through shell companies, all directed toward preserving art that had been deemed dangerous. Some of those pieces were now in the vault, hidden from the world but not destroyed. Maria hadn't just painted. She had protected, preserved, rebelled, quietly, powerfully. Then came what would later be called the message wall. Near the back of the warehouse was a corner partitioned off by black curtains. Behind was a wall completely covered in pinned sketches, photographs, and note cards, hundreds of them. Some had dates, others had names. Most were cryptic, but at the center, a single large canvas stood out. Unlike her usual style, this one was filled with vibrant blues and golds. It showed an open hand, reaching upward from what appeared to be water. Above it, a shattered sky. At the base of the painting, scrawled in hurried paint, were the words, "Let them see the truth when I'm gone." That message, simple as it was, changed everything. Maria had been telling a story, not in a book, not on a stage, but in silence, through a lifetime of coded beauty and buried voices. She had been building a gallery that would only ever exist once she disappeared. Voice slows, weight building. It begged the question, why? Why go to such lengths to hide all of this? Why bury it beneath decades of curated detachment? Perhaps Maria believed the world wasn't ready. Perhaps she believed she wasn't ready. Or maybe this was her only way of speaking. In a world obsessed with volume, Maria chose silence. In a world demanding presence, she gave absence. And in a world chasing applause, she left behind a vault. A vault that didn't just reveal her secrets. It revealed us, our assumptions, our blind spots, our failure to ask what an artist might be hiding behind the work. The moment Maria Bennett's vault hit the public sphere, the story exploded. What began as whispers among New Orleans locals soon erupted into headlines across the art world. But with recognition came repercussions, and questions no one was prepared to answer. Within 48 hours of the vault's opening, Maria's estate was flooded with inquiries. Private collectors, museum directors, law firms, investigative journalists. Each wanted something. Each claimed to know something. Each believed they were owed something. At the center of it all was Lillian. Just days earlier, she'd been a quiet archivist, estranged from her aunt, unsure how to grieve a woman she barely knew. Now, she was the executor of the most enigmatic estate in recent art history. She didn't just inherit paintings and journals. She inherited a storm. And the eye of that storm? Ownership. Many of the works found inside the vault didn't belong, at least not fully, to Maria, or so the claims alleged. Some pieces were co-owned under aliases. Others were gifted decades ago, without proper documentation. A few were rumored to be stolen, though no evidence surfaced, just whispers. One sculpture, titled Silent Grief, matched a missing piece reported from a Berlin collection in 1993. A pair of minimalist paintings bore uncanny similarities to works once owned by a reclusive Japanese collector who disappeared in 2008. Another canvas, and signed, looked strikingly like a missing Diego Rivera. Lawyers began circling. Some were looking for restitution, others for reputation. A few, perhaps, just for relevance. But for Lillian, every legal notice wasn't just a challenge. It was a contradiction to the woman she was discovering piece by piece. She remembered holding one of Maria's coded journals late one night, the warehouse silent around her. On the brittle, yellowing paper was a single passage. What is stolen if it was forgotten? What is mine if I save it from ash? It haunted her. Was Maria a thief? A savior? Both? Neither? Every corner of the vault seemed to blur the lines between legality and morality, between art and possession. between silence and statement. Lillian found herself reading case law and ethics articles, then returning to the art, searching not for answers, but for Maria's voice beneath the brushstrokes. She wasn't the only one struggling. The art world fractured almost immediately. One camp praised Maria as a visionary, someone who'd fought to preserve suppressed pieces, to shelter forgotten artists and protect endangered works. To them, the vault was sacred, a gift. Others condemned her. They called her a hoarder of culture, a woman who denied the world access to pieces that could have transformed public collections. They called for accountability, transparency, even criminal investigation. And behind closed doors, deals were being offered. One international foundation proposed acquiring the entire vault to establish a permanent Maria Bennett museum. Another wanted to buy select works for silent private display, no questions asked. But Lillian didn't answer any offers. Not yet. Not until she understood what Maria had truly wanted. That's when she found the directive. Inside a red leather notebook labeled simply M, hidden beneath an overturned easel, was a letter. It wasn't addressed to anyone by name, but Lillian knew it was meant for her. It read, "If you are reading this, I'm no longer in the world. The noise will come. Don't fear it. Let the truth speak, not through words, but through what I've left behind. Guard what matters. Release what must be seen. Some will fight you. Let them, but do not let the story be auctioned in pieces. You are its witness now." At the bottom was one final line. I was not protecting the art. I was protecting the message. Lillian sat with that letter for hours. Outside, lawyers called. Journalists camped on the sidewalk. Collectors made promises with 6 zeros. Inside, Lillian made a decision. This wasn't just about ownership. It was about legacy. Maria hadn't hoarded art. She had preserved it, shielded it, contextualized it. And now, Lillian would be the one to carry it forward. But that choice wouldn't come without cost. As legal battles escalated, the emotional toll weighed heavier than any lawsuit. Lillian found herself dreaming of Maria, though they hadn't spoken over 15 years before her death. She remembered holidays as a child when Maria had appeared briefly, always dressed in dark colors, quiet, distant but oddly gentle. Now she felt like she was learning who her aunt really was for the first time. And it hurt, not just because of the mystery, but because of what they had lost by never knowing each other while Maria lived. What if she had asked more? What if Maria had trusted her sooner? Now, the only dialogue was through paintings, notebooks, sculptures, and secrets. But slowly, Lillian began to realize maybe that was Maria's voice. Maybe that's how she always intended to be heard. What began as a legal nightmare became, for Lillian, a personal calling. She wouldn't sell off the vault in pieces. She wouldn't let it be buried under litigation. Instead, she would find a way Maria's way, one that honored silence as a choice, not a void, one that turned controversy into conversation, one that could show the world the cost of seeing and not seeing a woman like Maria Bennett. For days, the vault consumed Lillian's every waking thought. And just when she believed she'd seen it all, when the stacks of journals, hidden sketches, and disputed canvases had given up their secrets, there came something entirely unexpected. It was small, almost forgettable. A single locked drawer in a rusted filing cabinet shoved beneath a work table, hidden behind an old linen sheet. She nearly missed it. But fate, like art, reveals itself in fragments. Inside the drawer was a white envelope. On its front, in clean block letters, read only, "The last gift." Lillian's hands trembled as she opened the flap. Inside, a letter handwritten in ink that had slightly faded and a set of instructions carefully typed on a vintage typewriter. Each word crisp and deliberate. The letter was addressed to no one, but like the red notebook before it, it was clearly meant for her. It read, "What we give in silence speaks louder than applause. I've lived for beauty, not for praise. I've kept too much hidden, but this must go out into the light. When the time is right, auction 5 works anonymously. Do not link them to my name. Let the art breathe without me attached. Use the proceeds for what matters. Real creation begins with healing." There was no signature, just a small sketch drawn in the bottom corner. A child holding a paintbrush in a storm. Lillian stared at it for a long time. The accompanying typed note listed 5 works by coded title only. No location, no descriptions. It took her days to match them, not because they were hard to find, but because each was hidden in plain sight beneath the bold and infamous canvases that had caused so much noise. One was a piece titled Color in Silence, a painting with no recognizable pattern, just overlapping layers of pale greens and blues. Peaceful, gentle, almost childlike. Another, Grief Without Eyes, was a small sculpture of a face with the eyes removed, one of the most haunting works in the entire vault. The third was simply untitled Hope, a canvas half-painted, colors bleeding upward instead of down, as though the sky were lifting the world. The fourth and fifth were even simpler, a torn sheet of black cloth layered with gold stitching, and a wooden frame containing 12 tiny portraits of unnamed children, all faceless. No context, no grandeur, but somehow they felt truer than everything else. Lillian understood then what Maria had meant. These weren't her masterpieces. They were her message. She didn't want them sold because they were hers. She wanted them freed. And the purpose? That was clear in the final line of the typed instructions. All proceeds to fund long-term art therapy in underfunded public schools. Anonymous donation. No foundation name. No credit. Let the art heal. It was a Maria no one knew. Not the millionaire artist. Not the controversial recluse. But the quiet woman who saw pain where others saw potential, and knew that creation wasn't just expression. It was survival. Lillian contacted a trusted art broker under the guise of a fictional donor collective. She used a legal firewall to shield the origin of the works. No press, no hints, just art. The auction was quiet, but it shook the right circles. Buyers felt something unique in the pieces, something unspoken. The works went for high six-figure sums, even without a name. Some collectors even declined to resell them. They claimed the works felt too intimate, too important. Every dollar went exactly where Maria intended. Within months, pilot programs launched in 3 public schools across Louisiana. Children who had never held a brush before were now building canvases from their memories. Teachers reported students opening up about grief, loss, even trauma. One boy, who had lost both parents, painted nothing but blue circles for weeks. When asked why, he simply said, "It's how I talk to the sky." Lillian visited one of those schools alone. She stood in the back of the classroom, watching children paint their stories with colors they didn't know they had words for. She didn't tell anyone who she was. She didn't need to. She could feel Maria's presence in the laughter, in the focus, in the silence that filled the room as brushes danced across paper. It was the most profound exhibition Maria Bennett ever curated. And no one would ever know, because that's how Maria wanted it. Not a headline, a heartbeat. Lillian realized that day the vault wasn't the treasure. This was. The final gift wasn't the works themselves. It was what they could become when set free. Maria had created in silence. But in that silence, she had planted something extraordinary. And now, without fame, without fortune, without even a name attached, she was changing lives. By the end of the 3rd week, Lillian had spent more time in the vault than she had ever spent with her aunt in life. The dust no longer bothered her. The silence no longer felt hollow. In fact, it felt like home. She began to recognize the rhythm in Maria's chaos, the deliberate order in the disarray. The vault wasn't a storage room. It was a map of her mind, a place where grief and genius, pain and purpose, coexisted in absolute stillness. Voice softens, heavier with emotion. Lillian begins to process the emotional burden. Each unfinished sculpture now felt like a conversation cut short. Each canvas, half covered in strokes or stains, felt like a secret Maria never had the chance or the courage to tell. Some pieces had fingerprints embedded in the paint. Others had entire journals rolled inside their frames. Lillian found one painting with a faded photograph glued to the back, a picture of a young Maria, maybe 20 years old, standing barefoot in the rain with a girl Lillian didn't recognize. Both of them were laughing. So alive, so human. And in that moment, Lillian realized something she'd been avoiding. She never truly knew her aunt. Not really. As a child, Lillian remembered Maria as distant, not cruel, Not cold, just unreachable, like a statue in a garden you weren't allowed to touch. Her mother used to say, "Maria's too busy for family. She lives in another world." Lillian had believed that, but now she questioned everything, because here in this hidden world were pieces of Maria that were aching to be found, stories buried in journals, regrets folded into the corners of old canvases, names of people she'd loved, lost, or left behind, scribbled in margins. There was sorrow in every sculpture, but more than that, there was longing, a longing to be seen. And somehow, Lillian was beginning to see her. She thought back to a conversation they had when she was 13, the only real one. Maria had come to visit after Lillian's father died. It was brief, maybe an hour. They sat on the back porch, the air thick with Louisiana heat. Maria didn't say much, but before she left, she handed Lillian a small sketchbook. On the first page was a drawing of two hands, not holding, just reaching toward one another. Lillian had forgotten all about it. Until now, that sketchbook was in the vault too, stored in a box labeled Almost. Maria had created her final masterpiece not on a wall or a canvas, but in the act of hiding, preserving, and ultimately revealing her truth. And now, Lillian carried that truth. She didn't ask for it. She never wanted to be anyone's executor, let alone a life so complicated, so heavy with meaning. But standing in that vault, surrounded by echoes and brushstrokes, she felt something shift. For the first time, she didn't feel like the niece of a famous recluse. She felt like Maria's intended witness, not to the fame, not to the myth, but to the woman behind it all, the one who was too afraid to speak loudly, the one who chose silence because it was the only language she trusted. Lillian could have sold it all, could have monetized the chaos, branded it, made documentaries and podcasts and book deals. But she didn't. She archived every piece digitally. She stored the most sensitive journals in a fireproof safe. She reached out to a private museum, one that specialized in posthumous curation, and proposed a rotating exhibit titled The Artist's Shadow. It would feature select pieces from a vault, curated without her name, just as Maria would have wanted. Anonymous, quiet, unapologetically strange. The museum accepted, and Lillian made one final request, that the exhibit include an empty chair and an old paintbrush beside a blank canvas. Visitors would be invited to sit, hold the brush, and write one truth on the canvas before they left. Not a signature, not a drawing, just a sentence. Something real, something unfinished. Weeks later, on the final day she spent in the vault, Lillian sat down in the center of the room. She didn't take photos. She didn't pack a thing. She just breathed, inhaled the scent of old wood, paint, and history. Then she took out the small sketchbook, the one Maria had given her as a child, and turned to the last page. She wrote, "I see you now," and closed the book. Maria Bennett never wanted the world to look at her. She wanted the world to feel, to reflect, to question the neat lines they were taught to color inside. She didn't speak loudly, but her silence had a voice. And it's only now, after her passing, that the world is finally beginning to hear it. She turned down every biographer, refused Lifetime Achievement Awards. She walked away from television specials, declined front-page interviews, and once shredded a gallery invitation mid-sentence. People called her eccentric, cold, arrogant, but they were wrong. She wasn't chasing mystery. She was protecting meaning. Maria understood something most of us never will. That fame is a spotlight, but truth needs darkness to grow. So she built her masterpiece in shadows. Her warehouse wasn't just an archive of hidden art. It was a confession, a sanctuary, a graveyard of grief and genius, buried until someone loved her enough to unearth it. The bones in her sculptures weren't grotesque. They were memoirs of pain molded into shape. The coded journals weren't eccentric. They were lifelines, tied to moments too fragile to say aloud. Even her plan to fund art therapy wasn't a surprise. It was the purest reflection of who she was, a woman who believed in art not as a product, but as salvation. She never cared about galleries. She cared about little girls who couldn't afford paint, about young artists told they weren't marketable. She cared about the broken, the quiet, the unfinished. That's why she left her final gift not to a museum or a collector, but to children. Children who would never know her name, but who would someday hold a brush because of her silence. Maria wasn't building a brand. She was building a rebellion, one stroke at a time, one piece hidden behind another, one truth whispered through pages no one was supposed to read. She believed the world didn't need another icon. It needed honesty, even if that honesty had to come decades later, through the trembling hands of a niece who simply wanted to understand. Today, people visit the artist's shadow not for spectacle, but for permission to be messy, to be real, to create without applause. They sit in that empty chair beside a blank canvas and write truths of their own. I was afraid to love her. I lied about who I was. I miss my father. I want to start over. Each truth joins a growing wall of honesty, sentences left behind by strangers who finally felt seen, just as Maria hoped they would. Maria Bennett wasn't a ghost. She was a mirror, and in her silence, she left behind a voice more powerful than any speech, exhibition, or award. Her vault wasn't shocking because of what was in it. It was shocking because it reminded us of what we've lost in ourselves. Vulnerability, patience, purpose. She's gone now, but her silence remains. Not empty, not cold, but full of color, pain, and truth. And if you listen closely enough, you might still hear her whisper, "Let them see the truth when I'm gone."